You are listening to part 42 of our series, 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Jim and I'm so glad to be back with you. We had a wonderful time last week talking about three of Stephen Booner's favorite antiviral herbs and kind of astonishing ourselves at the amazing power of elderberries, ginger, and licorice. Three herbs that we're all already familiar with at least a little bit, but that turn out to be ever so much more than we thought they were. It's kind of like finding out that Clark Kent is really Superman, right?
Indeed. And I'm looking forward to you exploring licorice root more and hearing about your findings on it.
Right. Well, we said last week that sometimes licorice is sold with a compound pre-removed from it because there's a compound that adversely affects blood pressure and drives blood pressure up. Okay. And it's certainly kind of one of the things that allowed me to take some distance from licorice. And then we'll also remember Stephen Booner, who said very, very clearly, licorice is always used with other herbs. It's not a standalone kind of herb. And so I can also see that's also kept me back from the licorice a little bit because I really like my herbs one at a time.
Okay.
And since I don't much like the taste of licorice, it certainly never occurred to me, just, for the fun of it, to ruin the taste of any other herb by putting licorice in with it.
Now, I had tinctured it with brandy because I got on this bitters kick, and I had read somewhere that licorice could be used as a bitter in cocktails. Mm-hmm. So along with some other herbs, I made it, but it's just the one compound type of tincture. But I'll be curious to try it with other things. I'm very intrigued by our conversation last week.
Yes, me too. Me too. So I promised that this week we would talk about the herbal antis. And I think of them, as these kind of wonderful herbal antis, each with their own personality. And, of course, that they're not the A-N-A-U-N-T-I-E-S, they're the A-N-T-I-S, the antis. We've been talking about antibiotics and antivirals. But there are also antimicrobials, antiseptics, and antibacterials. In a way, these three words mean three different things. That's why we have three different words, because they mean slightly different things. Specifically, an antibacterial supposedly kills all bacteria, good and bad. So the things that we think of like antibiotics like penicillin and amoxicillin tend to be antibacterial. They just wipe out gut flora along with any bad bacteria. Antimicrobial is supposed to be a little more discriminating. Antimicrobial agents are supposed to do more harm to the bacteria we don't want and less harm to the good bacteria. But the real skilled workers of this set are the antiseptic substances, which are said only to kill septic bacteria, septic meaning disease-causing bacteria, and to leave the rest of the bacteria alone. Now, if truth be told, these words are not used with great rigor. In fact, it's a bit of splitting hairs because we don't really know if bacteria A is bad and bacteria B is good. Case in point, after quite a lot of being ignored, some years back, a researcher finally proved that a bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, is responsible for stomach ulcers. And once he had proved that, everybody was very happy to jump on the bandwagon, test patients to see if they had Helicobacter, and if they had it, to give them antibiotics to kill the bad bacteria. While it is certainly true that this bacteria does cause stomach ulcers, it turns out that when we kill it, a lot of other bad things happen. That it's actually there to do some good in our body. So, again, we can't just neatly say these are the bad bacteria and these are the good bacteria, and these things are just going to kill the bad bacteria and leave the good ones alone, because we just don't really know exactly where that is or what that is doing. And as we have been noticing, as we have gone deeper and deeper into the immune system and into anti-infective herbs, which is the general category, that's the anti whose house they're at, right? Anti-infective runs the house, and antiviral, antibiotic, antibacterial, antiseptic, and antimicrobial live there. And so the anti-infective herbs, I'm going to guess, probably don't work the same way drugs do. In other words, if we have a drug, it tends to be very specific. If we have an herb, it tends to be not so specific. Now, granted that the herbs we're looking at are the more broadly acting herbs, and there are some that can be specific. But in general, we are noticing that these anti-infective herbs that we're most interested in are the ones that are going to do the most. And this also leads us to a very interesting thing, in that we then don't have to be so concerned about diagnosis. If we're using a drug, the drug is generally going to be very specific to a specific virus, or to killing viruses in a specific way, or to specific bacteria, or killing bacteria in a specific way. Whereas when we're using the herbs, we don't have to know the specific strain of the flu or the specific strain of the hepatitis, because these herbs work through not just one, but multiple mechanisms, so that they have a lot of keys on their key ring, and they can find the very best way in. There are so many anti-infective herbs that I had to sit for quite a while figuring out how I wanted to present anti-infective herbs, asking myself what would be the best way to do it. And I want to begin just by giving us a wonderful kind of overview of anti-infective herbs. This is from the Herb book by John Lust. And I certainly don't think that it is in any way a complete list. And there are herbs in his book that I consider highly anti-infective that he doesn't list in this list. And so to me, it's interesting how many anti-infective herbs there are, and what causes an herbalist to say, these are the anti-infective herbs that I prefer to use, and these are the ones that I know about. So here is the list from John Lust, the Herb book. And he calls them antiseptics: agave, cranberry, bilberry, clove, cubeb, echinacea, eucalyptus, feverweed, golden seal, lignum vitae, heather, lavender, mustard, myrrh, olive leaf, onion, sandalwood, sassafras, sweet gum, tormentil, white pond lily, wild indigo, which is baptisia, willow, and wormwood. Now, John Lust's book has been written a while ago, more than 50 years ago. He had an incredibly short list of herbal antibiotics. In fact, what he listed as herbal antibiotics was quite surprising to me. Sundew, Iceland moss, and marijuana. And I didn't realize that marijuana had ever been considered an herbal antibiotic. So I then looked in a newer book, a newer herbal, one that has, much more scientific backup. And the primary anti-infectives that they mentioned included some of the ones that John Lust had, but also had some that he didn't have that I found interesting and that we're somewhat familiar with. And that includes tea tree and melaleuca, birch, thyme, cinnamon, self-heal, and pineapple. Pineapple contains an enzyme called bromelain. And bromelain has been found to activate T cells in the body. And of course, T cells are one of the major parts of the immune system that help keep us healthy. I think of them as troubleshooter cells. When those T cells get activated, the trouble is going to be in trouble. So, looking over that list, I also think, well, isn't that interesting? Although they certainly include some herbs that I list, if I had to sit down and make a list of my favorite anti-infective herbs, I would include some of the herbs from John Lust's list and some of the herbs from the newer herbal, but probably one of the herbs that I would put in my top 10 is not mentioned in any of those lists at all, and that is yarrow. And I find yarrow to be a really wonderful anti-infective herb. So I did indeed kind of challenge myself to think about and make a list of, if I was limited to 10 herbs as anti-infective herbs, and that was it. I was going to be sent off to Mars or whatever with my herbs and not be able to resupply. What would I want to take with me? What would be my favorite anti-infective herbs? In no particular order other than they occurred to me in this order, I have just mentioned yarrow as one of my absolute favorite anti-infective herbs for a wide variety of things, but especially externally. I like to use tincture of the fresh flowering top of yarrow and use it immediately on any wound to kill infection. Certainly, yarrow can be taken internally. I'm not sure if its antibacterial properties carry on internally as well. Many, many people absolutely swear that yarrow is the best anti-infective for any bladder infection. I have always used uva ursi and like it very, very well. There's many people who really like cranberry and like that, but how wonderful to know that there's also the possibility of using yarrow. Classically, yarrow is used against colds and flus, and especially when taken hot. Is that because it has a direct antiviral effect? Not so far as I know, but it certainly does a lot of other things. And of course, echinacea. Throughout the years that we've been doing the shows here at Time Monk Radio, I've had many occasions to talk about echinacea, and I talk about it at length in my newest book down there, Sexual and Reproductive Health for Men and Women, The Wise Woman Way. And just last month, we talked in some detail about echinacea, different species of echinacea, growing them, making them. You can see me making echinacea tincture on YouTube and talking about using it. And Stephen Booner and I agreeing that what's really important about using echinacea is using very large amounts of it and using it very, very frequently. And both he and I have basically found that echinacea can clear virtually any infection that we have set it up against if it is used consistently, frequently, and in very lavish amounts. Poke root is a plant that you may have heard me mention now and then. It's not a safe herb. Poke is considered quite poisonous, in fact. It's not that poisonous. It doesn't really kill you. But it's a scary herb because it has berries that stain your mouth and tongue. And so if children eat the poke berries, it's pretty obvious they've eaten them, and then parents rush them off to have their stomach pumped because they're terrified that they will kill themselves from poke berries, which, so far as I can find, nobody has died from pokeberry poisoning. It gives you diarrhea and makes you throw up. It's not really a killer thing. But poke root is an incredible anti-infective medicine. If I'm working with echinacea and I do not see the results I want fast with echinacea, and I mean, I'm usually looking to start to see some results within a couple of hours, certainly within 12 hours. If I'm not starting to see those results and I'm in a really bad situation, I'm going to add poke in with my echinacea. I don't need to add much. I wouldn't want to take more than 4 drops of poke tincture in any given day. I certainly know people who have taken up to 30 drops a day, but that's a very large dose. And I have been told by some people who took that much that they hallucinated when they took large amounts of poke. I had certainly had mild visual hallucinations, even at small to moderate doses of poke, but those have been more than 4 drops a day, which is why I say that's a pretty safe level for the vast majority of people. I often say that poke is well named. It really goes into your body and pokes your immune system with a hot poker. It's like the immune system does not get a break when poke is around. We also know that poke is extremely active in the lymphatic system, and it really moves lymphatic fluids. This is perhaps one of the reasons why poke is considered such a powerful anti-cancer herb, as well as being an anti-infective herb. But certainly, if I was being shipped off to far ends of the universe, I would want to have a bottle of poke tincture with me, not the least of which is because it's used in 1 to 4 drop doses. Taking a single bottle of poke would probably last me and all the people going with me to the far ends of the universe for a very, very long time indeed, because, of course, it would take us that long to get to the end of the universe. Myrrh is a very interesting anti-infective herb. It is a resin. And resins, especially resins from trees like pine sap, are so anti-infective that if an insect gets stuck in pine sap, it can be stuck there and dry into and harden as part of the dried sap over hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, and become an insect in amber. So it does not decay. The tree resins like myrrh and frankincense, like pine saps, like the sap from quaking aspen, are collected by bees and used by bees in their hives to prevent infection. And should a mouse crawl in the hive and they kill it, they cover it in myrrh so that it does not rot. The Egyptians used myrrh in embalming. Now, myrrh does not taste good. Myrrh tastes really bitter. And it's a bitter taste that lingers for a long time. But myrrh, like yarrow, has an incredible ability to kill bacteria on contact. in a way, I'm gilding my lily by having both yarrow and myrrh. But myrrh, being a resin, sticks a little more than yarrow does. Now, yarrow has some resins in it. And it is resins in both of these that are exerting a lot of the anti-infective qualities of it. But myrrh can be used in much smaller quantities because it is bitterer. And it stays put in the mouth better than yarrow does. Yarrow is wonderful for brushing the teeth and rinsing the mouth, and it's a marvelous way to keep the oral tissues healthy. But if there's an active infection going on in the mouth, it's myrrh that I'm going to reach for. Myrrh tincture that I'm going to be put where that toothache is. Myrrh, like the other resins, is not so often used internally. And that is because resins are not good for our kidneys. Our kidneys have very fine structures, and resins, as we know, are awfully sticky. What we usually do in order to use resins internally, and I thought maybe I could call it 10A if I could get yet another one in my list, and that would be to let the bees do the work for me, and so I could have propolis. Propolis is these resins. Of course, I don't live where myrrh trees grow, so I'm not going to have myrrh resin, but I'm going to have lots of other good tree resins. So the bees collect the tree resins and turn it into propolis. That way, rather than my having to worry about gumming up my kidneys, the bees will have gotten most of the real stickiness out of it, but left all of the anti-infective and antimicrobial features. Propolis can be sprayed directly on the back of the throat if there's a cough or a sore throat, and you will often find it in modern formulations against colds and flus. Well, we would certainly have to have something from the mint family. Mint family plants are the kinds of plants that we just about take for granted. We cook with them, we have mint tea, we feel so safe and comfortable with them that it comes as almost a shock to discover that many of them have very strong anti-infective qualities. In fact, constituents found in thyme and constituents found in rosemary are being studied to see if they can't be used as food preservatives. They are so strongly antimicrobial, and they work so effectively to kill and to keep out foodborne bacteria that as we look to eliminate chemicals from our diet, both thyme and rosemary are sitting at the back of the class with their hands up, waving their hands, going, let us come back to the front. Let us come back to the front. We have so much to share with you. Even healol. Did you notice that healol or self-heal was in the list of anti-infective plants? I was astonished to find it there. I think of it as an antioxidant, and because it's a scentless mint, I don't think of it as having as much anti-infective activity as something as scented as thyme, which contains thymol, or rosemary, which contains rosmarin, or lavender, which contains lavandin. And all three of those, thyme and rosemary and lavender, have made somebody's top of the list for anti-infective herbs, especially when they are brewed up very strong, and we don't want to be drinking them on a regular basis at that strong strength. But should we need it that way, it's nice to know it's there. So if I was going off again somewhere, I'd want to have one or more of the mints with me. Tulsi, of course. Holy basil is also thought of in this way. And I would be happy that I would probably be able to grow one more of those mints. They're so tolerant of different growing conditions that I bet they would even grow in outer space. Lysnia is an anti-infective herb. It is one of the few herbal medicines that is used that is a lichen. And it was very interesting to me that in John List's herb book, that Irish moss, which is also a lichen, was listed as being an antibiotic and as being an antiseptic herb. Irish moss isn't local to where I am, but Usnea is. And I'm wondering if the compounds that make Irish moss so effective against infection are similar or the same to the ones that are in Usnea. Usnea is pretty easy to find. I've seen it growing in the redwoods. I've seen it growing in fruit orchards in Canada. I've seen it growing beside a waterfall in New Zealand. It is a common plant. It looks a little like Spanish moss, but it doesn't drip quite so much from the tree. And there's like a white thread inside the Usnea. Usnea has to be tinctured, and that tincture then can be used for very deep infections. We talked a little bit about yarrow and how we don't usually use it for anything other than bladder infections. And we talked about myrrh and how it's safer to use propolis if we need to use it internally, because myrrh, again, is not so happy within us inside. But Usnea is a plant that we can use to carry into very, very deep infections that occur after surgery, infections that occur after trauma or accident, infections that the body seems to almost wall off, and then it makes it very hard to get in to those places. I would also like to have some garlic or some onion with me as an anti-infective herb. I know that that's kind of heavy to carry around, and it's kind of offset by the fact that the Usnea is terrifically light, although I'd probably be carrying it as a tincture rather than carrying the actual plant. But garlic and onions, well, my friend James Duke, whenever he went to the Amazon, put an onion in his pocket. And he said, no matter what happens, I'm going to be able to cure it if I have this onion in my pocket. Again, this is real kitchen medicine, to look at the anti-infective qualities of both garlic and onions, and throw a little more garlic, a little more onions into your soup or your stew tonight. I would probably also like to have some cinnamon or some cloves with me. They are, of course, used in the areas where they're grown as anti-infectives, and they have nice tastes as well, and are often used in food to help keep septic bacteria out of the food. Well, my goodness, Jim and I, once again, we have used up all of our time spending time here with the aunties and looking at all of the girls here in the house of anti-infection. And I think that at some point we said that we wanted to talk a little bit about astragalus, and that it's a support for the immune system. We haven't done that in these 2 weeks, and I think we're just going to go on to looking at painkillers, what's wrong with painkillers, and some herbal painkillers that we can use instead when we get back together next week. Green blessings to you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to help reweave the healing cloak of the ancients and reestablish herbal medicine as people's medicine. Anybody who wants to visit me, come to SusanWeed.com. I keep the sun in Susun, but we have both Susun Weed and Susan Weed, so spell it or misspell it, and you'll get to the right website. And if you're interested in my books, go to mywisewomanbookshop.com. You'll also find correspondence courses and my schedule of events for this year. I'm going to be all over the place. Let's see if we can't get together. Thanks so much, Gemini, for another wonderful time together. And next week we will slightly move forward on our topic and look at what happens when we're in pain.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's always our pleasure here at Time Monk Radio to have you join us. And this concludes part 42 of our series, The 7 Medicines the Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.